"You're running from something, Kirstin," Jason said, his voice low, almost drowned out by the drumming rain against the windshield. "Don't pretend this is just a vacation." Kirstin gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "And what if I am? What does it matter to you?" He looked at her, the dashboard light catching the sudden intensity in his eyes. "Because you're taking me with you. And I need to know if we're driving toward a cliff." She forced a laugh that sounded brittle, even to her own ears. "You were the one who said yes, Jason. No one forced you into this car." "No," he murmured, looking out at the dark highway. "But I think we both know why I'm here." The idea of the road trip had been born not of wanderlust, but of necessity, or perhaps desperation. Kirstin Mascagni needed to leave Seattle. The city had become a suffocating maze of memories, every coffee shop a reminder of Domitilla Toninelli's betrayal, every rainy afternoon echoing with Ugo Asencho's hollow apologies. She needed space, open roads, and a destination undefined. The plan was simple: pack her reliable, albeit slightly dented Subaru Outback and drive south until the ache in her chest dulled to a manageable throb. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of dreary, soul-sapping twilight that makes one question their life choices. Kirstin was hauling the last of her hastily packed duffel bags down the narrow stairwell of her apartment building. She was struggling with a particularly unwieldy box of books when she nearly collided with him, Jason Cousin. Her neighbor from 4B, he was a quiet man, an architect, she thought, or perhaps a graphic designer. Someone who kept irregular hours and always smelled faintly of expensive coffee and old paper. They had exchanged polite nods over the past year, occasionally held the door for one another, and once, during a power outage, shared a flashlight in the hallway. That was the extent of their relationship. "Whoa, easy there," Jason said, reaching out to steady the box before it tumbled down the remaining stairs. He was wearing a faded band t-shirt and jeans, looking rumpled but surprisingly alert. "Sorry," Kirstin huffed, adjusting her grip. "Just trying to get out of here." Jason raised an eyebrow, noting the multiple bags stacked near the front door. "Moving? I didn't see a truck." "No, just leaving for a bit. A road trip." The words tumbled out faster than she intended. She felt a sudden, inexplicable need to explain herself. "Seattle and I need a break from each other." Jason leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. He didn't offer the usual platitudes. "Oh, sounds fun," or "Where to?" Instead, he looked at her with a quiet intensity that made Kirstin suddenly aware of her messy bun and the dark circles under her eyes. "Must be nice," he finally said, his voice carrying a strange cadence, a mix of wistfulness and something darker. "Just packing up and driving away." Kirstin laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "It's not as romantic as it sounds. Mostly it's just me, a lot of podcasts, and an unhealthy amount of beef jerky. In fact," she added, the words escaping before she could filter them, "you should come. I could use a co-pilot to handle the awkward." It was a joke, a throwaway comment meant to lighten the mood, a nervous deflection from the heavy silence that had settled between them. She expected him to chuckle, wish her a safe trip, and retreat into his apartment. Instead, Jason stared at her. The silence stretched, becoming thick and palpable. Kirstin shifted uncomfortably, regretting the words almost instantly. "What are you doing?" she berated herself. "You don't even know this guy." "Okay," Jason said. Kirstin blinked. "Okay, what?" "Okay, I'll come." He said it with such finality, such immediate acceptance, that Kirstin momentarily lost her voice. She stared at him, trying to read his expression. There was no hesitation, no polite demurral. It was as if he had been standing there, waiting for exactly this invitation, his bags already packed in his mind. "Jason, I was joking," she stammered, feeling a sudden surge of panic. "I mean, I'm leaving right now, tonight. I don't even have a destination." "I know," he replied, uncrossing his arms. "Give me 10 minutes. Before she could protest further, he turned and bounded up the stairs, leaving Kirstin standing in the hallway, the box of books heavy in her arms, wondering what on earth she had just done. 10 minutes later, exactly as promised, Jason emerged from the stairwell. He carried a battered leather duffel bag and a sleek laptop case. He didn't look like a man spontaneously abandoning his life. He looked resolute, focused. Kirstin had spent those 10 minutes pacing beside her car, debating whether she should just get in and drive away before he returned. But a strange mix of curiosity and an underlying unspoken loneliness kept her rooted to the spot. Trunk? Jason asked, gesturing to the Subaru. She popped it open mechanically. He stowed his bags with practiced efficiency, closing the lid with a satisfying thud. I brought coffee, he offered, holding up 2 large insulated cups. Thought we might need it. Right, thanks. Kirstin took a cup, the heat seeping into her cold fingers. She slid into the driver's seat, feeling the sudden suffocating reality of the situation. This stranger was in her car. They were going on a trip. So, she said, starting the engine, the familiar rumble offering a brief comfort. Where to? You're driving, Jason replied, settling into the passenger seat and adjusting the vent. South seems logical given the weather. Kirstin put the car in gear, navigating out of the cramped parking lot. As they pulled onto the wet streets of Seattle, the silence stretched between them. It wasn't the comfortable silence of old friends, nor was it the awkward silence of strangers. It was a heavy, pregnant silence, thick with unspoken questions. She stole a glance at him. He was staring out the window, watching the city lights blur in the rain. His profile was sharp, his jawline tense. What was he running from? Why had he so readily agreed to jump into a car with a neighbor he barely knew? You know, Kirstin began, her voice tentative, you don't have to do this. If you just needed an excuse to get out of the apartment, I can drop you at a bus station or something. Jason didn't turn his head. I'm exactly where I need to be, Kirstin. The use of her name startled her. He had never used it before. It felt intimate, almost intrusive in the enclosed space of the car. They drove for hours in near silence, the rhythm of the windshield wipers the only soundtrack. Kirstin found herself hyper-aware of his presence, the way he shifted in his seat, the subtle scent of sandalwood and rain that clung to him. She realized with a jolt of anxiety that she knew absolutely nothing about the man sitting next to her. She didn't know his last name, his profession, his favorite color. She didn't know if he was dangerous. Around 2 a.m. the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a creeping exhaustion. The highway stretched out before them, an endless ribbon of dark asphalt. Pull over, Jason said suddenly, his voice breaking the long silence. Kirstin tensed, her grip tightening on the wheel. Why? Because you're drifting across the center line. It's my turn to drive. She hesitated. Relinquishing control of the car felt akin to relinquishing control of the situation, but a massive yawn forced its way out of her, betraying her fatigue. She pulled onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching under the tires. They switched seats in the cold night air. As Jason slid behind the wheel, he adjusted the seat and mirrors with a calm precision. Kirstin huddled in the passenger seat, pulling her jacket tighter around her. Try to sleep, he said gently, not looking at her. I'll get us to Oregon. Kirstin closed her eyes, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the road lulling her into a restless slumber. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was a fleeting image of Ugo's face, quickly replaced by the sharp, enigmatic profile of the stranger beside her. Kirstin woke to the harsh glare of the morning sun and the smell of stale coffee. The car was parked at a desolate gas station, the landscape outside a muted palette of browns and grays. She sat up, wincing at the crick in her neck. Jason was outside, leaning against the hood of the car, a steaming cup in his hand. He looked surprisingly rested, despite having driven through the night. Kirstin pushed the door open, the crisp air instantly waking her up. Where are we? She asked, her voice raspy. Just past Eugene, he replied, offering her a second cup. Black, right? Kirstin took it, surprised he had noticed, or perhaps guessed correctly. Thanks, you drove a long way. I like driving at night. Less traffic, fewer distractions. He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon. We need to talk about ground rules. Kirstin bristled slightly. Ground rules? For a spontaneous road trip? Especially for a spontaneous road trip, he countered, turning to face her. We're two strangers trapped in a metal box. If we don't establish some boundaries, we'll kill each other before we reach California. Assuming we're going to California, Kirstin muttered, though the idea of the sun-drenched coast was undeniably appealing. Rule number 1, Jason continued, ignoring her comment. No invasive questions. We tell each other what we want to tell each other, when we want to tell it. Kirstin considered this. It suited her perfectly. She had no desire to dissect the wreckage of her relationship with Ugo, or explain the messy fallout with Domitila. Fine. Rule number 2, I pick the music. A small smile played on Jason's lips. Negotiable, but acceptable for now. Rule number 3, we split expenses evenly. Agreed. Kirstin leaned against the car, the warm metal contrasting with the cool air. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in daylight. There were faint lines around his eyes, suggesting he was older than she initially thought. His eyes were a startling shade of gray, intelligent and guarded. "Why did you come, Jason?" she asked, breaking rule number 1 almost immediately. He didn't seem angry. He just looked at her, the smile fading from his lips. "You broke the rule, Kirstin." "I know, but I need to know." "Oh, you practically jumped at the chance to leave." Jason sighed, turning his gaze back to the empty highway. "Let's just say my situation in Seattle had become untenable. Your invitation was a lifeline. I took it." It was a non-answer, veiled in vague language, but it confirmed her suspicion. He was running too. The realization forged an unspoken bond between them, a shared understanding of the desperate need for escape. They got back in the car, the atmosphere slightly less tense. Kirstin reclaimed the driver's seat, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just driving aimlessly anymore. They were driving away. As they navigated the winding roads of southern Oregon, the silence between them felt less oppressive. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing the driving, the silence, and occasionally fragments of conversation. "So, what do you do?" Kirstin asked later that afternoon, testing the boundaries of the no invasive questions rule. "I'm a consultant," Jason replied vaguely. "Consulting on what?" "Risk management." Kirstin laughed, the sound loud in the enclosed space. "A risk management consultant jumping into a car with a near stranger? Isn't that a bit hypocritical?" Jason glanced at her, a spark of amusement in his gray eyes. "Sometimes the biggest risk is staying exactly where you are." The words hung in the air, resonating deeply within Kirstin. She thought of Ugo, of the stagnant, comfortable misery they had shared. She thought of Domitila, the friend who had smiled to her face while unraveling her life behind her back. "You're right," she murmured, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Sometimes you just have to jump." The miles blurred together as they crossed into California, the landscape transforming from dense pine forests to rolling golden hills. The tension that had coiled tight in Kirstin's chest began to loosen, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the man sitting next to her. They stopped for the night in a small, unassuming motel off the highway. As they checked in, the clerk gave them a knowing look. "Just the one bed, then?" he asked, his voice dripping with forced cheerfulness. Kirstin felt a flush creep up her neck. "Actually, we need 2 beds." The clerk shrugged, handing over a key. "Suit yourselves, room 12. They walked in silence to the room, the cheap gravel crunching under their feet. The room was small and smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke, dominated by 2 queen beds covered in garish floral bedspreads. Jason dropped his bags on the bed closest to the door. "I'll take the first shower," he said, disappearing into the bathroom. Kirstin sat on the edge of the other bed, listening to the sound of running water. She pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up with a barrage of missed calls and texts. Ugo, Domitila, her mother. She felt a familiar surge of panic, the urge to respond, to explain, to apologize. Instead, she turned the phone off, tossing it into her bag. For the first time in months, she felt a profound sense of isolation, but also a strange, exhilarating freedom. She was untethered, floating in a liminal space between the life she had left behind and whatever lay ahead. And for now, that was enough. Morning arrived in room 12, not with a gentle dawn, but with the harsh angled light of a California sun cutting through a gap in the cheap blackout curtains. Kirstin woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a fractured, terrifying second, she thought she was back in Seattle, waking up in the apartment she had shared with Ugo, dreading the moment he would turn over and feed her another lie about where he had been the night before. She blinked, the faded floral ceiling of the motel bringing reality rushing back. She was in California. Ugo was 1,000 miles away, and Jason, cousin, was standing by the window, already dressed, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand. "Bad dream?" Jason asked. His voice was low, devoid of the forced cheerfulness people usually adopted in the morning. "Just a memory," Kirstin said, pushing her tangled hair out of her face. She sat up, pulling the thin sheet around her shoulders. "You're up early." "I don't sleep much," he replied, turning away from the window. "I went down to the lobby. The continental breakfast is mostly stale Danish and sorrow, but the coffee is passable. I got you one." He nodded toward the nightstand between their beds. "Thank you." Kirstin reached for the cup. As she did, Jason's phone, resting beside the coffee, illuminated with a harsh buzz. She didn't mean to look. It was a reflex, a habit born from months of trying to catch Ugo in a lie. But her eyes darted to the glowing screen before she could stop them. A text message banner sat front and center. Antonello Hagen. "The board is furious. They know you took the ledgers. Don't do anything stupid, Jason. They're looking." Kirstin froze, her hand hovering an inch from her coffee. "The ledgers? They're looking?" Jason stepped forward in 2 quick strides, snatching the phone from the nightstand with a speed that made Kirstin flinch. He shoved it into his pocket, his jaw tight. The easy, quiet companion of yesterday was gone, replaced by a man coiled with tension. "Ready to hit the road?" he asked, his tone clipped. Kirstin nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Yeah, let me just shower." 30 minutes later, they were back in the Subaru, merging onto Highway 1. The Pacific Ocean stretched out to their right, a vast, glittering expanse of sapphire blue that crashed against jagged cliffs. It was breathtaking, a postcard-perfect view that felt entirely at odds with the suffocating atmosphere inside the car. The silence was no longer comfortable. It was a physical weight. Kirstin gripped the steering wheel, stealing glances at Jason's rigid profile. He was staring out the window, his jaw working as if he were chewing on glass. Who was Antonello Hagen? What ledgers? She had invited a stranger into her car, a man who, by all appearances, was on the run from something far more dangerous than a broken heart. "You're gripping the wheel so hard your knuckles are transparent," Jason said suddenly, not turning his head. "I'm fine," Kirstin lied. "Rule number 1 was no invasive questions," Jason continued, his voice softer now. "But that doesn't mean we have to sit in silence. You're thinking about the text." Kirstin exhaled sharply. "You saw me look." "I did." He finally turned to face her, his gray eyes shadowed. "I told you I was a risk management consultant. I didn't lie. I consult for large corporations. I assess their vulnerabilities. But sometimes when you dig into a company's risks, you find out the biggest risk is the executives themselves." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I found things, Kirstin. Millions of dollars rerouted, ghost accounts, the people in charge. They aren't the kind of people who let you just walk away with that knowledge. Antonello is an old colleague trying to warn me. I took data to protect myself, an insurance policy. That's why my situation became untenable. That's why I'm in your car." The confession hung in the air, mixing with the scent of sea salt coming through the vents. Kirstin processed the information. He wasn't a criminal. He was a whistleblower. "Are we in danger?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Not immediately," he assured her. "They don't know I left Seattle yet, let alone that I'm in a stranger's Subaru heading down the coast. But I understand if you want me out. Pull over at the next town, and I'll disappear. You won't be involved." Kirstin looked at the road ahead, the highway winding along the edge of the continent. She thought of Seattle, of Ugo and Domitila making a fool of her, of the feeling of utter powerlessness that had driven her out of her home. Jason wasn't the only one running, but at least he had fought back. "No," Kirstin said, shifting gears as they climbed a steep hill. "We split expenses evenly. You owe me for gas." For the first time since yesterday, a genuine, unguarded smile broke across Jason's face. It transformed him, erasing the harsh lines of stress and making Kirstin's breath hitch in her throat. "All right, co-pilot," Jason said softly. "Drive on." By mid-afternoon, the relentless winding of the Pacific Coast Highway demanded a break. They pulled into a gravel parking lot perched precariously on a cliffside in Big Sur. The diner was a relic of the 1970s, all faded seafoam green vinyl and panoramic windows streaked with salt spray. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully as they entered. The place was nearly empty, save for a few locals clustered at the counter. "Sit anywhere you like, darlings," called a voice from behind the counter. A woman in her late 50s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes as sharp as sea glass, wiped her hands on a heavily stained apron. Her name tag read, Martine. They chose a booth by the window, sliding into the worn vinyl seats. The ocean roared below them, a mesmerizing display of raw power. "It's beautiful here," Kirstin murmured, tracing a ring of condensation on the scarred wooden table. "It is," Jason agreed, though his eyes weren't on the ocean. They were resting on her. You look better today, less like you're carrying the weight of the world. Kirstin flushed, suddenly hyper-aware of his gaze. I feel a little lighter, I suppose. The distance helps. Martine appeared at their table, dropping 2 laminated menus with a clatter. Coffee for the groom, tea for the bride? She asked, her tone entirely matter-of-fact. Kirstin choked on her saliva, coughing into her napkin. Oh God, no. We aren't married. Jason smirked, leaning back in his seat. Just passing through, Martine. Martine raised a skeptical eyebrow, looking between them. Honey, I've been serving plates here for 30 years. I know the look of 2 people running away to elope. Or just running away. She tapped the table with her pen. You don't drive 3 states away with someone unless your souls are tied or your lives are in danger. Which is it? A little column A, a little column B, Jason quipped, deflecting effortlessly. We'll take 2 coffees, black, and whatever you recommend for food. As Martine bustled away, chuckling to herself, Kirstin buried her face in her hands. Well, that was mortifying. I thought it was insightful, Jason said. She recognized kindred spirits. We're a pair of strays, Kirstin. After they ate burgers that tasted like salvation, they wandered down a narrow, treacherous path that led from the diner to a secluded cove below. The air grew cooler as they descended, the roar of the waves drowning out everything else. The beach was a wild stretch of dark sand and massive, sea-smoothed boulders. Kirstin stepped onto the sand, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She felt a sudden, fierce surge of joy. She spun around to face Jason, a genuine laugh escaping her lips. It's incredible, she shouted over the wind. Jason watched her, his expression unreadable. He closed the distance between them, stepping into her personal space. The sheer size of him, the heat radiating from his body in the cool air, made Kirstin's heart skip a beat. Be careful, he warned, his voice low, audible only because he was so close. As if on cue, Kirstin took a step back, her boot catching the edge of a slick, kelp-covered rock. She pitched backward, a gasp leaving her lips. Jason moved with terrifying speed. His arm shot out, catching her around the waist before she could fall. He pulled her against him, hard. For a long, suspended moment, the world stopped. Kirstin was pressed flush against his chest, her hands braced on his shoulders. She could feel the steady, rapid thud of his heart through his jacket. She looked up, her face inches from his. His gray eyes were dark, intense, scanning her face with a hunger that made her breath catch. Got you, he whispered, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips. I'm okay, she breathed, though she made no move to step away. The tension between them was electric, thick and undeniable. The boundary of strangers had long been crossed, replaced by a pull so strong it terrified her. He leaned in, just a fraction, the distance between their mouths closing. A seagull shrieked overhead, shattering the spell. Kirstin stepped back, her cheeks burning. I should watch my step. Jason's hands fell to his sides, his jaw tightening again. Yeah, the tide is coming in. We should head back to the car. They climbed the path in silence, but the air in the Subaru was forever changed. The spark had been struck, and neither of them could unfeel the heat of it. By early evening, the rugged cliffs of Big Sur smoothed out into the rolling vineyard-covered hills of Santa Barbara County. The silent tension in the car had morphed into something softer, a shared, unspoken anticipation. I think we deserve an upgrade, Jason announced as they passed a series of illuminated signs for luxury lodges. We survived the cliffs, we survived Martine, and we survived my impending corporate assassination. Let me pay for a real hotel. Kirstin smiled, the lingering warmth of his touch on the beach still humming in her veins. Okay, deal. They pulled into the Oakhaven Retreat, a sprawling resort nestled among ancient oaks and sweeping vines. It felt like a different universe compared to their grimy motel. Jason booked a suite with zero hesitation, his credit card, presumably one not tied to his corporate life, gliding through the machine. After showering and changing into the nicest clothes they had packed, they ventured down to the lodge's acclaimed restaurant. The ambiance was intoxicating, dim lighting, a roaring stone fireplace, the clinking of crystal glasses. They ordered a bottle of Syrah, the alcohol warming Kirstin's blood and loosening her tongue. So, Kirstin said, swirling the dark wine in her glass, if you weren't a fugitive risk manager, what would you be doing right now on a Thursday night in Seattle? Jason chuckled, the sound deep and rich. Probably sitting in my apartment, listening to the muffled sounds of my neighbor moving heavy boxes around, wondering if I should offer to help. Kirstin laughed. I was not that loud. You were a menace to the structural integrity of the building, Mascagni, he teased, his eyes crinkling. It was perfect. For the first time in months, Kirstin felt entirely present, entirely unburdened. She was looking into Jason's eyes, realizing with a jolt of panic and thrill that she was falling for a man she had known for exactly 48 hours. Well, 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 I don't believe it. The voice sliced through the romantic haze like a rusty scalpel. Kirstin's blood ran cold. She froze, the wine glass stalling halfway to her mouth. She knew that voice. It was the voice of loud frat parties, of crude jokes, of Hugo's shadow. She turned slowly. Standing beside their table, holding a martini glass and looking devastatingly smug, was Tom Etienne. And clinging to his arm was Lair Headland, Domitilla's younger, equally venomous sister. Tom, Kirstin breathed, the bottom dropping out of her stomach. The real world had just violently crashed into her sanctuary. Kirstin Mascagni, Tom crowed, drawing the attention of nearby tables. Hugo has been out of his mind. You ghosted everyone, packed up your apartment, and vanished. He thought you were dead in a ditch. And here you are in Santa Barbara, drinking wine with... Tom's eyes shifted to Jason, scanning him with immediate primal hostility. Who's this guy? Tom, this isn't the time or the place, Kirstin said, her voice shaking slightly. The suffocating maze of Seattle had found her. Not the time, Lair chimed in, her eyes sharp and assessing. Domitilla is devastated, Kirstin. She made a mistake, and you just nuked a 10-year friendship without letting her explain. It's incredibly immature. The audacity of it, the gaslighting, the shifting of blame, made Kirstin dizzy. Domitilla had slept with Hugo in Kirstin's own bed, and somehow Kirstin was the immature one for leaving. The walls of the restaurant seemed to close in. She couldn't breathe. We were having a private dinner, Kirstin managed to say, pushing her chair back slightly. Look, Kirstin, Tom said, his tone shifting to something ugly and demanding. He leaned heavily over the table, invading her space. You're going to call Hugo right now. He deserves an explanation as to why his fiancé ran off with some rando. Before Tom could pull his phone from his pocket, a hand clamped around his wrist. The movement was so fast, so utterly silent, that Tom gasped in shock. Jason hadn't stood up, but his hand was locked onto Tom's arm like a steel vice. The lady, Jason said, his voice dropping an octave, possessing a terrifying, lethal calm, said this is a private dinner. Tom tried to jerk his arm away, but Jason didn't budge a millimeter. The smugness evaporated from Tom's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. Hey, back off, man, Tom stammered. I'm just talking to my friend. She isn't your friend, Jason replied, his eyes dark, empty, and completely terrifying. And you aren't talking to her anymore. You and your companion are going to turn around, walk back to the bar, and pretend you never saw her. If you text Hugo, if you call him, if you so much as breathe her name tonight, I will make sure the next time you see me, you won't be able to speak at all. Do we have an understanding? Lair took a step back, her bravado shattering. Tom swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. Jason released Tom's wrist with a flick of his fingers, as if discarding trash. Go. Tom rubbed his wrist, opening his mouth to speak, but one look at Jason's predatory stillness silenced him. He grabbed Lair's arm and practically dragged her toward the exit. The silence that followed at the table was deafening. Kirstin sat frozen, her chest heaving, staring at the man across from her. The gentle companion of the car ride was gone. The corporate risk manager was gone. In his place sat someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a threat. Jason picked up his napkin, calmly dabbing his mouth. He looked at Kirstin, the terrifying emptiness fading from his eyes, replaced by deep concern. Are you okay? He asked softly. Kirstin looked from the exit back to him. The bubble hadn't just popped, it had been blown to pieces. And yet, looking at Jason, she didn't feel afraid of him. She felt fiercely, undeniably protected. No, Kirstin whispered, a single tear escaping down her cheek. I want to go to the room. The heavy oak door of Suite 42 clicked shut, sealing them off from the opulent corridors of the Oak Haven retreat. Inside, the suite was a masterpiece of rustic luxury, A massive stone fireplace crackled with gas logs, casting a warm, flickering glow over plush leather armchairs and a sprawling canopy bed. But Kirstin barely registered the grandeur. The moment the lock engaged, her legs gave out. She sank onto the edge of the nearest armchair, burying her face in trembling hands. The adrenaline that had kept her upright in the restaurant was rapidly evaporating, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. Tom's sneering face, Lair's self-righteous accusations, they had dragged her violently back to the rainy, suffocating streets of Seattle. "Hey." Jason's voice was softer than the crackling fire. He didn't hover over her. Instead, he knelt on the thick woven rug in front of her chair, bringing himself down to her eye level. "Look at me, Kirstin." She shook her head, drawing a ragged breath. "I was doing so well. I actually thought I had escaped it. But they looked at me like I was the villain, like catching my fiancé and my best friend in my own bed was somehow an inconvenience to their social circle. People like that rely on you feeling small so they can feel big," Jason said, his hands reaching out to gently clasp her wrists, pulling her hands away from her tear-streaked face. His thumbs brushed over her pulse points, his touch grounding her. "What Tom and Lair think is entirely irrelevant. They are static on a radio channel we are no longer listening to." Kirstin looked into his gray eyes, finding no pity there, only a fierce, unwavering solidarity. "How did you do that? Downstairs, you completely paralyzed him without throwing a single punch." "Risk management," Jason replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You identify the threat, you isolate it, and you apply exactly enough leverage to neutralize it. Tom is a coward who relies on volume. You take away his volume, he has nothing left." "I was terrified," she confessed, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But not of you." "I would never hurt you," he said, the words carrying the weight of a solemn vow. "Never." The silence in the room shifted, the lingering echoes of the confrontation fading, replaced by the heavy electric tension that had been building since the beach at Big Sur. Jason was still kneeling between her knees, his hands now resting lightly on her hips. The proximity was intoxicating. Kirstin could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the cedar and smoke of his cologne mixed with the crisp sea air they had driven through all day. She didn't think about Ugo. She didn't think about the miles behind them or the uncertainty ahead. She leaned forward, her hands sliding up Jason's chest to grip the lapels of his jacket, and pulled him in. Jason met her halfway. His mouth crashed down on hers, hungry and desperate. There was no hesitation, no tentative exploration. It was a collision of two people who had been holding their breath for days. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her effortlessly from the chair and pulling her flush against him as he stood. Kirstin tangled her fingers in his hair, kissing him back with a ferocity that surprised her, pouring all her fear, her relief, and her burgeoning love into the kiss. They stumbled backward, breaking the kiss only to breathe, their foreheads resting against each other. Jason's eyes were dark with desire, his breathing ragged. "Kirstin." Before she could answer, a sharp electronic vibration shattered the quiet. Jason froze. The sound wasn't coming from his pockets. It was coming from the sleek black laptop bag he had tossed onto the bed. He pulled away from Kirstin, his expression instantly shifting from open vulnerability to guarded calculation. He strode to the bag, pulling out a small, cheap burner phone. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening. He answered without a greeting. "Yes." Kirstin watched him, her heart still hammering from their kiss, but a new, icy dread creeping into her veins. "When?" Jason asked into the phone. He paced toward the window, pulling the heavy curtain back an inch to peer into the darkened parking lot. "Are you sure it was the card? I used a proxy." He listened for a long moment, the silence stretching agonizingly. "Who did he send? Sukup? Damn it." Jason closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. "All right, we're leaving now. Have the server ready. If I don't initiate the handshake by 0600, burn it all down." He hung up, tossing the phone back into the bag. He turned to Kirstin, the romantic haze entirely banished from the room. "We have to go," he said, his voice clipped and urgent. "Right now." "What happened? Who was that?" Kirstin asked, already moving to grab her discarded shoes. "That was Elsa Madsen. She's a contact of mine, an investigative journalist waiting for the ledgers," Jason explained, rapidly sweeping the room to ensure they hadn't left anything behind. "Antonello Hagen flagged the credit card I used at the front desk. The The proxy bounced, but not fast enough. They know we're in Santa Barbara. Kirstin's stomach dropped. Are the police coming? Worse, Jason said grimly, throwing his jacket back on. Hagen sent Jeffrey Sukup. He's a corporate fixer, the kind of man who makes liabilities disappear without a paper trail. We have a 3-hour head start, maybe less. We need to get to Elsa's safe house before Sukup finds us. They fled the Oak Haven retreat like thieves in the night, the tires of the Subaru kicking up gravel as they peeled onto the darkened highway. The romantic promise of the evening had been utterly obliterated, replaced by a paranoid, adrenaline-fueled sprint down Highway 101. Jason drove, his hands locked onto the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror every few seconds. The dashboard illuminated his face in harsh, hollowed-out angles. Kirstin sat in the passenger seat, a map app open on her phone, guiding them toward a set of GPS coordinates Else Madsen had texted to Jason's burner. "Who is Jeffrey Sukup exactly?" Kirstin asked, her voice tight. The shadows outside the car seemed to stretch and contort into menacing shapes. "He's a ghost," Jason replied, passing a slow-moving semi-truck with aggressive precision. "He doesn't exist on company payrolls. When an executive gets a DUI, Sukup makes the arrest record vanish. When a whistleblower gets too loud, Sukup ensures they suddenly decide to relocate to a country without an extradition treaty, or they just have a tragic accident. And he's looking for you because of the ledgers," she concluded, gripping the door handle. "The ledgers contain proof of over $40 million in embezzled pension funds," Jason said softly. "Hagen and the board were gutting the company to line offshore accounts. If I give these files to Else, her publication drops the story, the SEC moves in, and Hagen goes to federal prison for a very long time. Sukup's job is to ensure that hard drive never connects to the internet." They drove for hours, the coastline shrouded in thick, rolling marine fog that made the headlights reflect uselessly back at them. As the first pale hints of dawn began to bruise the eastern sky, Jason pulled off the highway in a sleepy, dilapidated fishing town north of Los Angeles. "We need gas," he said, steering the car toward a solitary, flickering pump at a deserted station. "And I need to check the perimeter. Stay in the car, lock the doors." Kirstin nodded, shivering despite the heater. As Jason stepped out to pump the gas, his eyes constantly scanning the fog-draped street, Kirstin pulled her personal phone out of her bag. She'd kept it off since they left Seattle, but a sudden terrifying thought struck her. Could Sukup track her? She powered the phone on. Instantly, it practically vibrated out of her hand, flooded with dozens of voicemails, texts, and alerts. But it wasn't a corporate fixer tracking her. It was an Apple Find My notification. "Hugo Asenjo is tracking your location via iPad." Her breath hitched. She had left her old iPad in the apartment, and she hadn't turned off location sharing. Before she could process the implications, a sleek, dark silver rental car pulled off the highway, its headlights cutting through the fog. It didn't pull up to the pumps. It parked directly blocking the Subaru's exit. Jason dropped the gas nozzle, his hand instinctively dropping to his waist, his body shielding the driver's side door. The door of the rental car opened. A man stepped out, looking rumpled and exhausted, his designer suit wrinkled. It wasn't Jeffrey Sukup. "Kirstin!" Kirstin stared through the windshield, her blood turning to ice. It was Hugo. He looked terrible, dark circles under his eyes, his hair unkempt. He marched toward the Subaru, completely ignoring Jason's menacing stance. "Unlock the door, Kirstin," Hugo demanded, rapping his knuckles on the glass. "Tom called me. He told me you were running around with some psycho. I took the red-eye to LAX and tracked your iPad. What the hell are you doing?" Jason didn't move, his eyes locked on Hugo with cold, terrifying calculation. He tapped the glass, signaling Kirstin. "Do you want me to handle him?" his eyes asked. Kirstin looked at Hugo, the man she had planned to marry, the man who had broken her heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. For months, the thought of this confrontation had terrified her. She had run 1,000 miles to avoid it. But looking at him now, standing in the cold fog, whining and demanding her obedience, she didn't feel fear. She felt entirely, profoundly exhausted by him. She unlocked the door and stepped out into the freezing air. "Kirstin, get your things." "You're coming home," Hugo said, reaching for her arm. "This has gone far enough. Domitila meant nothing, you know that. It was a mistake. But running away like a child, hooking up with your weird neighbor? Don't touch her," Jason's voice cracked like a whip through the damp air. He stepped forward, putting himself between Ugo and Kirstin. Ugo sneered, trying to puff out his chest. "Back off, man. This is between me and my fiancé." "She's not your fiancé," Kirstin said. Her voice was surprisingly steady. She stepped around Jason, facing Ugo directly. "I left the ring on the kitchen counter, Ugo, right next to the bedsheets you soiled." Ugo flinched, a flush of anger creeping up his neck. "You're being dramatic. We can fix this. You're just punishing me, but driving across the country? You're making a fool of both of us." "I'm not punishing you," Kirstin said, the realization settling over her like a warm blanket. "I don't care enough about you anymore to punish you. I'm just leaving you behind. You drove all night because your ego couldn't handle that I walked away. Well, Ugo, I walked away, and I'm never coming back." She turned to Jason, the man who had protected her, who had treated her with more respect in 3 days than Ugo had in 3 years. "Gas is done. Let's go." Ugo stared at her, mouth agape, as Kirstin got back into the Subaru. Jason offered Ugo a final chilling look before sliding into the driver's seat, shifting into reverse and maneuvering expertly around Ugo's rental car. They left Ugo standing alone in the fog, a ghost of a past she had finally exorcised. The safe house was not a house at all. It was an abandoned, rusted-out canning facility on a private rocky beach in Malibu. As Jason pulled the Subaru into the overgrown loading bay, the morning sun was finally breaking through the fog, casting long, stark shadows across the concrete. Standing by a folding table in the center of the vast, empty warehouse was Elsa Madsen. She was a woman in her late 40s, wearing a sharp blazer over a faded t-shirt, a cigarette dangling from her lips, and an array of laptops glowing in front of her. "You're late, cousin," Elsa barked as they approached. She didn't offer a handshake. She just held out a hand, expectant. "Tell me you brought the drive." "I brought it," Jason said, pulling a heavily encrypted reinforced thumb drive from an inner pocket of his jacket. "Bro, are the servers ready? If Hagen's tech guys detect the upload, they'll scrub their servers before you can establish the paper trail." "Have a little faith in my paranoia, Jason," Else said, snatching the drive and plugging it into a black box connected to her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "I'm routing this through a VPN in Switzerland, bouncing it to a server in Iceland, and simultaneously dumping it into the secure drop boxes for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the SEC. Kirstin stood back, watching the progress bar on the screen inch forward. 10%, 20%, crunch. The sound of tires moving slowly over broken glass and gravel echoed through the cavernous warehouse. Jason spun around, his hand instinctively reaching toward his waist again. A black SUV had rolled silently into the far end of the loading bay. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, entirely out of place in the industrial decay. He moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. "Jeffrey Sukup," Jason breathed, stepping in front of Kirstin and Elsa. "Jason," Sukup called out, his voice echoing, smooth and conversational. "You've led me on quite a chase. Antonello is very disappointed. He thought you were a company man." "I'm a risk manager, Jeffrey," Jason called back. "Antonello was the biggest risk to the company's survival." Sukup slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing a holstered firearm. He didn't draw it, but the implication was clear. "Be reasonable. Hand over the drive. You walk out of here, Ms. Mascagni walks out of here, and you both get a generous severance package deposited into an offshore account. You can spend the rest of your lives on a beach." Kirstin glanced at the laptop. 85%. "You know I can't do that," Jason said, stepping slowly to his left, drawing Sukup's attention away from the table. "I really don't want to kill you, Jason. It creates paperwork." Sukup sighed, finally drawing the weapon, the metal gleaming dully in the morning light. "But I will. 95%. "You're a smart man, Jeffrey," Jason said, his voice entirely devoid of fear. "You know how this works. Hagen hired you to clean up his mess, but if the mess is already public, what use are you to him? He'll throw you to the feds to shave time off his own sentence?" Sukup paused, his eyes narrowing. "The drive, Jason, now. Done," Else said loudly, pulling the thumb drive from the machine with a definitive snap. Sukup leveled his weapon at Elsa. "Stop right there." Else laughed, a harsh, grating sound. She picked up her laptop, turning the screen so Sukup could see it from across the room. Bold green letters flashed across the black terminal screen. "Upload complete. Data distributed. It's over, Sukup, Jason said quietly. The SEC has the ledgers. The Times has the emails. Hagen's accounts are being frozen as we speak. You have about 20 minutes before the FBI starts pulling flight records. Sukup stared at the screen, the smooth veneer of his confidence cracking. He lowered the gun slowly. He looked at Jason, then at Elsa, running the calculations in his head. He was a survivor, a mercenary. He knew when a war was lost. Without a single word, Sukup reholstered his weapon. He turned, got back into the black SUV, and threw it into reverse, peeling out of the warehouse and vanishing into the morning light. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing in Kirstin's ears. The threat was gone. It was truly over. Jason turned to face her, the tension draining from his shoulders. He looked exhausted, battered, but profoundly relieved. He walked toward her and Kirstin met him halfway, collapsing into his arms. "We did it," he whispered into her hair, holding her tight against his chest. "We're safe." Kirstin closed her eyes, listening to the steady, strong rhythm of his heart. She had left Seattle a broken, terrified woman running from a ruined life. She had arrived in California entirely remade. 3 months later, the California sun painted their new apartment in strokes of gold. Kirstin stood by the open balcony doors, the ocean breeze catching her hair, unburdened and entirely free. The ghosts of Seattle, Ugo's hollow lies, Domitila's betrayal, were finally silenced, replaced by the steady, reassuring presence of Jason wrapping his arms around her waist. He pressed a kiss to her temple, the man who had been a stranger a lifetime ago, now her sanctuary. They had driven away from their shattered pasts and accidentally found their future in the passenger seat. If this story of heartbreak, thrilling escapes, and unexpected romance resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good romantic drama. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for more gripping original stories. Your support means everything.